Welcome to another episode of Compassionate Coexistence, a podcast to help you cultivate connection and honor Earth. I'm Lex Sylvie, your fellow traveler on this journey toward hope, healing, and harmony for all beings. I have to start the second episode with a story. Shortly after moving to the Pacific Northwest, I decided I wanted to learn survival skills. I discovered a nearby wilderness school and signed up for a wild edible and medicinal plant weekend. And I signed up my friend too. We learned we could camp out overnight, and I figured we could manage at least that much. After the first day of class, as darkness fell, we raced to set up our tent in the cold and the rain, and then we sheltered inside, curling up on the inflatable mattress I had brought, which promptly deflated. I used a knife to cut strips of adhesive sealant I had brought, but no sooner had I run out of repair tape than I was rewarded with the hiss of escaping air. The next hiccup came when we went to zip up our sleeping bags, and the zippers came off their tracks. Needless to say, we ended up showing up to class the next morning quite bedraggled, to the poker-faced but probably stunned reaction of our instructor, who could survive in the wilderness for days with nothing but the clothes on his back, and likely in more comfort than we could with all of our gear. I share this story to give you a sense of where I started, and my awe of today's featured guest, Jason Knight of the Alderleaf Wilderness College in Monroe, Washington. Alderleaf offers classes on wilderness survival, wild edible and medicinal plants, permaculture, sustainable living, wildlife tracking, and outdoor education and leadership. Jason has taught wilderness skills for more than 2 decades. He's also worked with conservation organizations and government agencies, including with mountain lion research for the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife and with gray wolf research in Idaho. He's also the author of the book, The Essential Skills of Wilderness Survival. He holds a bachelor's degree in wildlife ecology and environmental education from the Evergreen State College and also holds a permaculture design certificate. Whether it's survival skills for natural disaster preparedness or wild plants for basic home health, Jason believes that wilderness wisdom provides many solutions for a lot of the modern environmental challenges we are facing today. Jason, thank you so much for being with us today. Can you start by telling us more about your connection to the natural world and how it started?
Yeah, it's always a trick how to make that a short story, right? There's so many different tangents, twists and turns, but I think I always loved the outdoors, and my friends looked to me as being an outdoorsy person. I had an uncle who would take me hiking. I was in the Scouts and stuff like that, and so I think it was later on in high school. I had a friend who he was more into fitness, and I think he thought of me as an outdoorsy person. He's like, "Oh, why don't you pick a mountain for us to hike, it'd be really fun." And so we drove up. We didn't go to the highest mountain in New England because there's a road to the top, Mount Washington. We did one of the next highest mountains, like Mount Adams, and yeah, I mean, we had the expectations for having this awesome day. It was a beautiful summer day when we got started early in the morning. But like halfway up this mountain, the wind started to come in, and then we hadn't read the topo maps very well, so it was like super steep. We probably should have had ropes, and we're getting above tree line, and it's like super slippery. And then the hail comes in. It's like sideways hail, and it's kind of scary getting up these rocks. But we finally get up to the top, and it's like super low visibility. We can't see where to go. We couldn't go back down the way we came because it was just too wet and steep. And then my buddy twists his ankle up there, and we're like, all right, we got to. And luckily, there's other trails that go down there look less steep, so we got to find one of these other trails down. But because the visibility was low and my friend's mobility, it was. We got soaked to the bone. We were super chilled. We weren't prepared. And we felt colder than we'd ever felt before. Like one of those times where you're like your teeth are chattering, you're shivering, and you're not sure how long you're going to last like this. And luckily, it took us hours, way longer than expected. We finally found the route down, but we had to go slow because of his ankle. And it was well into darkness, getting closer to midnight by the time we got back to our cars. And it was definitely like a near miss for us, and I felt partly responsible because I was the one who should know this stuff, and so that was part of the, I think, inspiration that led me down just seeking out all kinds of wilderness survival resources, and so one of those things was I found I was in a coffee shop on a bulletin board, cork board. There was a a little piece of paper about a survival skills club that was meeting once a month. And I got in touch with the fellow who was coordinating that and showed up to the next one. And that's when I started to learn all these like survival skills that are based on using natural materials instead of gear, like how you build a shelter out of sticks and leaves, or how do you make a friction fire from dead branches, or wild edible plants that you can eat, and how to track an animal, like all this stuff that I hadn't really been exposed to much before, and realize there's this whole other way of um, approaching not just a survival situation, but knowing about nature and being connected to nature. And it was completely mind blowing. I just fell in love with it, so much so that uh, that like I told my folks, like when I was getting ready to finish up high school, like I don't want to go to college right away. Like I want to immerse in all these wilderness skills. And so that's what brought me from where I grew up in Massachusetts out here to Washington. I was traveling all over the country, taking classes, learning things, going on like trips into the wilderness and practicing survival skills. And and I started working with one of my teachers as like an assistant, and I found a way to integrate it with a college degree. Like there's a college here in Washington State, Evergreen, that has like, at the time they had flexible degree programs where you could work with like a professor and an academic advisor and design your own degree. And so I got to get credit for a lot of this stuff I was doing, survival classes I was taking and other courses and wildlife tracking things, and started working with the Department of Fish and Wildlife even back then as part of my degree. And so the way that I ended up creating the first 9-month course on wilderness skills is I realized there was a gap. Like one of my teachers was doing tons of courses for kids. Another one of my teachers was doing tons of courses for adults, but they're all short, right? They last a day or a week. And I think both organizations were probably struggling to find qualified instructors. And I was meeting other people like myself who wanted to immerse in it, but there wasn't a program for them. There wasn't a structured way to gain all these skills in an efficient way. And like I'd run into some folks like similar to me, be like, oh man, I wish I could do what you're doing, but I don't know if I can like travel around the country or piece and part all this stuff together or self-design a degree. And while at the same time, like like I said, there was one school, they just couldn't find enough instructors for the kids programs they wanted to run. And so, I was kind of frustrated that folks like my age, college age at the time, is like over 20 years ago now, didn't have an opportunity to get these skills. So I created the course so that someone could gain all these skills over the course of a school year, September through June, and then be ready to teach, especially kids. And so, I created the first program in 1999, and over the years between the different courses, around 850, 900 students that I've worked with in 9-month courses that, a lot of them did go on to work for other outdoor schools, for parks, or use their tracking skills on wildlife conservation projects, or get involved with permaculture.
And I know we had talked a little bit about how you make it accessible to so many people. And I feel like, a lot of times it's like, am I going to be judged if I don't know anything? Or like, are a bunch of like lumberjacks going to show up to this class? Like you have those questions, but I love that Alderleaf, at least in our experience, like was so welcoming. Like we felt welcomed, we felt inspired, we felt empowered after that class. Like, can you tell me a little bit about why, like, what have you done to make it accessible for people? And why was that important to you, that people from all walks of life would be able to take something away from Alderleaf?
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes from the fact that everybody benefits from being connected to nature. Like we're just so disconnected from nature because of our technological society or our agrarian society. Like we're not hunter-gatherers anymore. So we don't have that relationship with the land anymore. And if we gain that relationship, not only does it enrich our own lives, but then I think we become better stewards of the natural world because we understand it better, we appreciate it more, and we better know we want to take care of it, and we can better have that appreciation ourselves and share it with others. And I think, some of the survival schools, maybe they tend to come from more like a gear or military background where it's more like tactical or self-defense, or your other ones come from a really more of a strongly, like personal growth and meditate in nature. And I think, like for me, I always want to find something that was like practical. Like these things, a lot of the skills we teach, they actually could come into play and help you if you got lost in the woods or if a natural disaster hits your neighborhood. Um, and or if like we have difficulties in the future with supply chain or climate change, like these things can come into play. Um, so I feel like they're practical in and of themselves, but through that practicality, I think the connection builds naturally and something deeper emerges without having to necessarily be overt about that.
Yeah.
Um, and so I guess that's kind of what differentiates, our approach to survival is like it's really practical and I try to make it really achievable. Like you don't need to be, look like a pro wrestler or something to be able to like do this stuff. It's like as I've taught grandparents to make friction fires down to kindergartners and everybody in between. And there's so many like simple things we can do, like incorporating wild edibles into our diet, or um, recognizing an animal track, or recognizing the bird sounds and seeing an animal hiding in the woods. Or they're skills that are very attainable and enrich our lives, and they have multiple benefits.
I'm wondering, you mentioned the disconnect of how technological our society is. And, when people come to Alderleaf, do you ever experience any resistance from people, or is it uncomfortable at some point for them to re-engage with the natural world?
That's a really wide question. I think everybody comes with their own, strengths and challenges, and things they're comfortable with or not comfortable with. I think it really depends on the class and what we're doing. We try to really ease folks into things. Like some schools, it's just like, oh, we're just going to throw you out there, trial by fire, suffer through things. Where we take more of an approach like we want to give you the background information you need to be successful. We want to demonstrate things. We want to coach you, do it with you, and then let you do it, but be there to support you in it. Um, so like in our weekend classes, I mean, they are very hands-on, but we also give you information. Like we go over information, maybe in a presentation. We have handouts, like we'll have demonstrations or examples of things. But then we're out in the forest and we're harvesting things, we're making things, we're hiking places. But it's like we're scaffolding up to like get you there where it's hopefully a comfortable experience, an enjoyable experience, because we want you to be so inspired that you want to go back out there and do it more. Like we don't want to throw someone out into a difficult situation unprepared where it's like so painful. They're like, yeah, I did my nature thing. I'm not going out into nature anymore after that. So um and like with the 9 month program, what's so great is we can scaffold up so much over the course of the year that by the end of the year they're ready for a survival trip where they're walking into the backcountry with just the clothes on their back, but it doesn't feel like this impossible challenge because they've built up all the separate skills and experiences over a school year, where they're ready to do that. So, and that's not to say that it's not there won't be like hard parts for some people on that. I think we all are more capable than we realize, and but there also is limits to what you can do and being aware of those, and like understanding what are the early signs of hypothermia, the early signs of dehydration. Those are all important things so that you can take preventative actions before you go too far in one of those directions.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm glad we touched on the wilderness program, but I also wanted to touch on the eco village, because just seeing how, when you were showing us around the garden, you're like, we built this, then we built this, and it looks like a lot, but it happened a little bit, over time, and was very clear how much hard work you had put into the community. But you also seemed like you were having a lot of fun, like just showing us around and everything you've done. And I wanted to ask you, like, what has been some of the coolest things that you've been able to do because you have Alderleaf? What has living on that property with your family allowed you to do that you might not have been able to do if you had followed the 9 to 5 office job? Like,
Oh yeah. I mean, so much. I mean, be able to walk out your back door and pick berries or harvest wild foods, or yeah, to be able to yeah, not have a commute, right? Like walk across the property to the office, or to teach a class. I mean, it's hard to put into words. I mean, there's just so much that I appreciate of being able to be at a place like this. There's so much wildlife here and so much abundance, and um, yeah, I'm super proud of the fact that we've been experimenting with all these ways to lower your ecological footprint, whether that's the solar panels on the barn roof or the free refrigeration with the root cellar, or you know the food we supplement our diet with from the garden or from the forest. And all of that is just incredibly enriching.
Has being able to live like that, have you noticed benefits? Just like, are your stress levels down? Do you feel like you're less rattled by the ways of the world? Like, what kind of personal impact have you seen on that, just on yourself?
Yeah, it's definitely like it's an empowering feeling, I think, because like we talk about survival skills, they give you this sense of empowerment in the outdoors, for the worries about like emergencies that would come up, like getting lost, being stuck outdoors in the winter or something like that. But then permaculture is like the extension
Mm.
of survival skills, and so permaculture is more like how you can live sustainably long term, into the future and work with nature, and not just have a low impact, but have a a positive impact. Um, and so when you do permaculture, I think it alleviates those concerns about um, massive, societal disruption, or a natural disaster coming through your neighborhood. Like I think I mentioned, when the power goes out, our daughter looks forward to it because like we just start a fire in the wood stove, and we have our water tank on the hill, so we still get gravity fed water even when there's no water to run the pump. I mean, no power to run the pump. Even if we run out of that, like we can just scoop water out of the creek and boil it and then use it. So, or if we can't make it to the grocery store because the road's flooded, we can go dig some potatoes from the garden for dinner. So, like you said, it brings this like resilience, and so you don't feel as much stress about worry in one sense. But in the other sense, there is a concern there that I think I've alluded to in some of our other conversations too, is that part of why I got into this field and done so many of the things that I've done is like, you want to be the change that you want to see in the world, turn the tide, and help others build a connection to nature, and therefore make better choices. And so, that as a society, we can make better choices. And so, it's hopeful to see all these nature schools and communities doing this stuff. Like that's definitely grown massively over the last 25 years. But at the same time, our environmental challenges have continued to mount, and in some ways, we've become more disconnected from nature because of smartphones, technology, and so you still worry about like um, all of these things. There's some stuff you can't stop. Like I had one friend, for example, she built this beautiful off-grid cabin out in the middle of nowhere. And the wildfires that were so bad one year, they came through, and it was a total, they call a total crown replacement fire, where every tree was destroyed. And even though she built the cabin to be resistant to fires, the fires took it out. Like so, everything just the whole property, the whole beautiful cabin just burnt to the ground. Um, and granted, like they survived, right? They evacuated, and they're going to rebuild at some point in the future. Um, but like there are our fire seasons getting more severe, and having these smoke seasons, like that's clearly on the rise. And that's in my mind around here, I think about, okay, what can I do to reduce the fire dangers? Like I think I've maybe planted things too close, or we have trees too close to the house.
Yeah.
Which direction is it going to come from? Because like we're the west side of the mountains is typically a very moist environment.
Mm.
Fire's not as big of a part of it, but with climate change, our summers get drier and drier, and on some of these bad fire seasons, you have fires happening on the west side, and because there's so much dead wood and all the trees and shrubbery around here, if we were to have like an extra dry summer and have fires here, they could be very strong.
There's so many different ideas out there about like what is stewardship and why should I care. Like I don't live out in the woods, like my house isn't going to be, there's that like, well, this isn't going to happen to me attitude. And it always strikes me as odd because we are also clearly interconnected, right? Like it's like
Right.
if only a small amount of us care, then like how much of a difference are we going to make versus everybody else's actions are going to impact us and our quality of life regardless. How would you define stewardship, and why do you feel like it's important that people care and that people learn to be better stewards?
In our modern society, it can be easy to forget that all of our survival comes from nature. Like everything we need comes from the earth, comes from nature. And like if you talk to almost any indigenous culture, they'll say like our original instructions as human beings are to be caretakers of the earth. Like that's our job. And for them, like when they were living, for all of our ancestors, really, when anyone was living as a hunter gatherer, like that is clearly obvious to you. Like if you over harvest a patch of medicine, when you need it next year, it may not be there, right? So you get like immediate feedback on how your actions impact. And I think that's what's difficult living in the world we are in now. Like you may not see the immediate impacts of the things that you consume, or the things that you dispose of. Like we don't dump our garbage. If I think we dumped our garbage on our own property, we'd be more mindful about reducing our waste, but we send it somewhere else and forget about it. And so it's like we don't feel directly connected to it. And the same thing, like if we grew our own food, we'd appreciate it a lot more. But because it's grown somewhere else and potentially on like a mass scale, with herbicides, like we're not having to the ones being exposed to all those chemicals because it's somewhere far away and it's brought to us. So I mean, what's really cool about like going out on a survival trip is you see your direct connection to nature in a real, tangible, raw way.
Yeah.
And then that your appreciation when you come home of like being able to turn on the spigot or open the refrigerator, go to the grocery store, or turn on the heat. It's like totally different.
Yeah.
You get it on a different level.
You mentioned indigenous cultures, and I've worked with a lot of tribal people, and you still see that ancient wisdom of like we have to take care of the earth. Like every indigenous person I've ever talked to like just has that. And I wanted to ask you because I feel like it ties in what we've been talking about with wilderness skills, but also with the broader actions we need to take as a society, this attitude of self-sufficiency versus community. Like, do they have to be separate, or can becoming more self-sufficient and having community attitudes of like interconnectedness, like we were talking about, like do you see those two in any way being intertwined?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think if you have like a level of self-reliant skills, then you can be a better asset to your community, and vice versa. Like that. But if you look at I think a lot of hunter-gatherer cultures, different. Everyone seemed to be know a little bit about everything to live. Like if got lost, they could take care of themselves. But then people would specialize. Maybe one person was really good with plant medicine, so they have their strengths that would contribute to the community. But they also could be self-sufficient if they got into an emergency situation and needed to be, or wanted to travel to visit another group of people that might be hundreds of miles away. They could take care of themselves on the journey, right? And then, so, yeah, I mean, I think it's more of a myth. Like I'm gonna like some people come and they're like, yeah, I'm just gonna learn all these skills and go live by myself, far away from everyone else, and can be completely self-sufficient. And I think that's extraordinarily difficult. We're social beings. Like there's something that nourishment we get from being around other human beings and having those connections. That's not to say that some people are wired for that or have done it. Like there's that fellow Prenneke, I think is his last name, went up in Alaska and like built a cabin in the middle of nowhere and spent a lot of time there. Folks are in different places in their lives oftentimes and engage with community at different levels and have different levels of self-reliance.
Okay.
That interconnectedness and community part was a couple of different ideas. So one teacher that I had, who's a nature skills and teacher, his name's Joe Lau. He's probably one of the best people at friction fire that I've ever met.
Oh, okay.
He has a website called Fire Dojo, but he spells it Phyre.
Okay.
He's an amazing martial artist, but he's also a wilderness skills fellow.
Oh, very cool.
And he had this thing that's like, he liked to say, regarding like being competent at wilderness skills. And he says we have 4 roles that all start with the letter P.
I see there's an
Perceiver,
acronym involved.
perceiver, providers, protectors, and preservers. And what he meant by that is like perceivers is to like use our awareness. Like in nature, we need to be using our eyes, our ears, smell, sense of touch, like really being putting our awareness out into the landscape and trying to perceive. That comes to like reading the bird language or reading the tracks or understanding where plants grow and the habitat. So it's being a perceiver. It's being a protector. So understanding that like, you know, we might have young kids or older folks that need support by able-bodied adults. So like taking care of others, being a protector of others, being a preserver, which for him that meant being a teacher. Like we should always be striving to learn important information, but then pass that down to the next generation. So we preserve knowledge. And then providers, you know, like when we're adults, again, we're trying to take care of the rest of our culture. Like if our parents are older and need our help, or if we have young children that need our help. So the other part that came to mind was another one of my teachers, John Young. Like he looks at things from an approach of like categories, or relates things to directions or the season. And so like when he looks at like what it means to like be a holistic naturalist, one of the lenses he looks through is like to be a good naturalist, you would know about the hazards in your area, like the poisonous plants, the dangerous animals, insects, that kind of stuff, weather that's dangerous. Another category would be like knowing about the animals, the wild animals, interpreting the tracks. Another area would be like knowing about the plants, their food and medicine uses and utility uses. Another one would be like knowing about survival and trees and how to make it through winter. Another area would be like knowing about birds and awareness. But then one of those main 6 areas would be then understanding like community and teaching. And so, so for him, like being a complete naturalist, it included both knowing about the natural world, but also how to be in community and how to pass down, teach skills.
How do you teach people to keep their cool? Because, you know, one of the things I see over and over and over again in wilderness survival books is like, stay calm. Like if a tree falls on your leg, stay calm. But it's like if you're facing death or you're facing like nobody tells you how to stay calm. It's just like, oh, you have to stay calm so you can survive. But it's like, how do you do that?
Right. So there's a couple of different things. I mean, for like survival emergencies, we use an acronym called SPEAR, SPEAR. And it stands for stop, plan, execute, assess, and reevaluate. And
Nice.
That relates to like, say you're lost on your hike, you're lost, right? So the first thing to do is to stop what you're doing, because it's really easy to be like, oh, I'm not lost, I'm just going to keep walking, or maybe I'm going to start running, you know, or I'll see something that I recognize eventually. But what's important to do is stop what you're doing and then assess your situation. Like maybe it's you only got another an hour of daylight. Maybe it's starting to get colder. Maybe you really don't know what direction you need to go to get out. And so you might be looking at like, okay, I have these resources in my backpack, or I have these resources in the natural landscape around me. It's going to get cold tonight. I need to deal with hypothermia first, right? Mm-hmm. So you put together a plan based on your situation and your survival needs, and then the E is execute. So by like engaging your body into and improving your survival situation, you might decide I need to make a shelter so I don't die of hypothermia tonight. By actively doing something to improve your situation, that helps prevent your mind from going down the path of panic and fear and all that emotion that can lead you to make really poor decisions. And so then say you finish building your shelter, well, then that's the A and the R part of SPEAR, is like assess and reevaluate. Okay, you built the shelter. Maybe it'd be way better if you had a fire. So your next project might be fire, or maybe you're super thirsty. And, dehydration starts to become a problem a couple days in. You might start taking steps to sort out how you're going to find and purify water. So by cycling back through SPEAR, stopping what you're doing, putting together a plan,
Mm.
getting your body actively engaged in it, you can keep that level head, that positive mental attitude
Yeah.
that you need to maintain in like a real survival situation.
Any advice for how to, if you're not used to this, like how do you get your feet wet?
Well, I mean, the great thing nowadays is that there are wilderness schools in almost every state now. And so there are opportunities to get into this field and into this type of education and training almost no matter where you are in the world. And if you're not, like, so we've got a website, a lot of free information that's accessible globally, right? And then we've got an online course that you can take from anywhere in the world. The field guides get better all the time. So I mean, I think, getting into this field, like one of the first things you can do is like start building up your collection of field guides, your plant guides and your wildlife guides and things like that. And
Awesome.
that's the positive thing about the internet, right? Is there's more and more resources all the time to support folks in going down whatever educational paths they want to go down.
Anything that you feel like I didn't ask you about like the essence of Alderleaf or your journey, or just what you would like for people to know about?
Let's say, like, I'll say that I'm super stoked about like some of the folks who come through Alderleaf over the years that are now like starting their own organizations. Like you have Dave Scott, who was an instructor here, who wrote a field guide on bird feather identification, co-authored it with another former student of mine, Casey, which was awesome. But now he's got his own school called Earth Native Wilderness School out of Austin, Texas.
Oh, very cool.
And
Okay.
they've been doing their school for a while now. I think probably 8 years or more, and it's going awesome. Like it's just blown up, and they see tons of folks, tons of kids in their classes down in the whole greater Austin area. And then we've had other students come through that have like just gotten schools going. Like Leah and Becca are two graduates of Alderleaf that have a school up in Newfoundland, Canada, that they've opened up, like a permaculture and nature school up there. But they're just getting off the ground. And then another fellow who came through our advanced 9-month program, Tyler, he has a school they opened up in Bend, Oregon called Nighthawk Naturalist School, I believe is the name.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and yeah, there's so many schools up and coming, which is awesome.
Yeah.
And that's like, I think I was mentioning this before, like we can have a nature school in every community. Like I think that would be an awesome thing, naturalist in every family. And that's what my one of my mentors, John Young, would say. If there was a nature school in every community and a naturalist in every family, like that's just a super awesome vision. I'll say there is, like, I think there needs to be more connections for, like, I've been talking about this, like, there's all these different nature schools, wilderness schools around the country, but they don't get together and like support each other as much as they could. There's a few things here and there. There's like a gathering every summer called Rabbit Stick Rendezvous in Idaho,
Okay.
which has been going on for like 30 or 40 years of like primitive skills teachers coming together and sharing skills. I've only gone a couple times in the late 90s. But now there's a few more like gatherings, but they're a lot smaller. That's the big one. There's one in Washington called Saskatoon Circle that I for years have been saying, oh, I got to make it to that. But there's with technology now and Zoom, I mean, there's got to be other ways to support each other. Like I remember during the pandemic, there was a handful of like, I don't know, 5 or 8 wilderness school leaders that we got together on a Zoom and we're talking about like how are we going to make it through this pandemic with all of our
Yeah.
classes shut down. Which reminds me, there's another neat school down in Portland called Trackers Earth,
Okay.
run by this guy Tony. Tony had come and taken some classes up when I was working with John Young in the late '90s, and then he started this thing Trackers Earth. But now it's huge. Like they see thousands and thousands of kids every summer. Like I don't know. I heard one number was like 20,000 kids this summer, or even a lot more than that. And then I've recently been in contact again because they're running some courses up here in the Seattle area, and so they're coming and visiting our site like a day or two a week during the summer, which is
Oh,
super
very
cool.
cool.
And so the older I get, the more I think about like how can we co-support each other and like grow this movement. And it's like crazy to think like when I was a teenager, like I could see the environmental problems coming and was wanting to focus my life on being part of a solution to it, just picking one part of the problem and trying to be part of a solution. And like you said, it's great being in having these courses where people get together and like you feel like there's all these people that share that kind of passion or vision for nature connection. so one of my teachers, John Young, right? Like, he's really passionate about this. Like, he's super passionate about seeing other schools get created as well, and he's been at this a lot longer than me.
Okay.
And he put together a book called Coyote's Guide to Connecting with Nature,
Okay.
and um, and in the back of that book, he had a list of like so many of the nature schools that kind of were connected with him in one way or another, and it was really inspiring to see um,
Yeah.
like how much of an impact he's had, and I think and that continues to reverberate. And oh yeah, John's a neat fellow. He's down in California, and he travels all over, including Europe and Africa, running
Wow.
courses and helping people with getting their schools running. And he's put out some other books. He's got a book called What the Robin Knows about bird language, which is just awesome.
Okay. I have homework I need to read. I've written down like everything that you said, and now it's like I'm gonna have to read them. So I get to read them, not have to read them. I mean, this is like the fun part of my life, is like following all these little threads that people give me. So
Yeah, yeah.
awesome.
Yeah, like the intersection where your work, like wildlife rehab and nature skills, to me is like wildlife tracking is where all
Okay.
that kind of comes together. And yeah, there's so many. I mean, there's so many field guides that are just very scientific. I'm trying to think what tracking books like capture the essence. There's a one called Practical Tracking,
Okay.
and then there's a movie called The Great Dance, which is about Stan Bushmen
Okay.
and how they relate with nature and track animals. And it's very moving. Yeah, it's really cool. But I think it captures the essence of like how wildlife tracking connects you with nature and brings you into being part of your environment and seeing the natural world as part of your community.
Yeah. I can just see so many different offshoots from everything you do, right? Because like I don't personally hunt, but like knowing how to identify scat would like definitely lower my fear when I'm like hiking out in bear territory. And I'm like, I don't know the sign. Like I'm in Western Washington. I mean Eastern Washington, but I travel to the West Coast, and I'm like, all right, I see a sign telling me there's cougars here, and I see a sign telling me that there's bears here, and I don't want to disrupt any animal, but I'm like, there's a level of fear there because I'm like, is there a cougar behind me? Like, I don't know. Is there a bear in front of me? Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
So I would love to learn how to track, just to be able to be aware of like where animals are and if they're in the area. And I feel like it would just be fun to like go out and blend into nature and
And like the application of wildlife tracking today is on conservation projects, research
okay.
projects.
Yeah.
Like so many of our students, vast majority, like learned it because they wanted to then work on these research and conservation projects. So we've had so many graduates go work on like mountain lion research or wolf research or lynx research or wolverine research, like on and on, like helping with conservation efforts, and that's how a lot of the bushmen and Shangan trackers are using tracking. Is like they're in the Kruger Park helping with conservation efforts with like the black rhinos that are endangered, things like that.
Wow. Okay. That is so neat. I didn't
Yeah.
know that, but that is
It's
very
like it's a
cool.
non-invasive way to gather information about animals in a landscape. You don't have to like capture them, and tranquilize them and all that stuff. But you like, for example, in Kruger, when they brought these San Bushmen into the park who were trained how to enter their data into these little handheld computers that predated smartphones, they
Okay.
had this group of Bushmen hike through the park for like 10 days or something like that. And when they came back, they downloaded the observations they had logged into the little handheld computers that had GPSs, and they had like 60,000 data points. And
Wow.
the park rangers were like, wow, this group of Bushman trackers collected more information about the wildlife in the park in the last 10 days than had been collected in the last 50 years.
Wow. Wow.
So uh, it's this super underutilized tool for conservation efforts.
That is neat. I won't keep you forever, but we just did a story on some Rwandan bat that they found, but it took the local trackers to find it. It's like they thought it was endangered, and then they hooked up with like the local like park rangers, and the park rangers like led them directly to the cave where there were like 10 endangered bats. And they're like, this is amazing. Like we got the first echo locator call like on recording. And now that we know they're here, we can look at what's destroying their habitats, and we can start working with local people to, you know, mitigate the negative impacts and things like that. So, but yeah, the local people are like, they're right there. And they're like, oh my gosh, they're right there. We've been searching for them for like so many years. So.
Well, that happens over and over again. Like when I was tracking wolves in Idaho, it was like shortly after they'd released some wolves in the mid '90s, and we discovered packs that weren't even known about by the biologists, because we found their tracks and sign. Okay. And then they were able to go in and verify it after we provided the data that we found based on tracks. And like the same thing around here, when I started working on one of the mountain lion projects, they've been getting reports like mountain lions moving through these habitat remnants closer to cities, but they weren't able to verify if these mountain lions actually had been to these places, you know, because people from the public misidentified dogs or bobcats all the time as mountain lions. And so they're putting cameras up in these parks and or in these little green belts, trying to see, you know, what does a mountain lion come through here or not. Okay. And when I started volunteering for the project, it was before digital cameras. You had to go and change out the film and change out the batteries, and the camera was separate from the sensor. But they were just getting pictures of like raccoons and possums and stuff. And when I was going to check on these cameras, I'm like, well, these cameras were like placed in maybe where there was a tree that was good to climb and put it in, but they weren't placed where there was animal trails or scats or tracks or anything like that. So I started to do tracking, because most biologists aren't trackers. Like they own a tracking field guide, but they really don't know much about know too much about tracking. I might know for a couple specific species. So I started to do some tracking, and I started to find evidence of animals like away from where their cameras were. And I started to ask, hey, can I move the cameras? But they're hesitant at first, like, oh, we don't want them to get stolen. They're in a good spot where people won't see them, or they're high enough up in a tree, or so it would be hard for someone to steal them. But I finally convinced this biologist who was in charge to let me move a camera, and I put it where I felt there was a trail that mountain lions were using. There weren't like clear tracks that you could photograph, but there was compressions that looked right to me, and a scuff mark, like scent marking scuff mark. And within 2 weeks, we had our first mountain lion pictures on this project, and they had been trying to get pictures for 3 years. Okay. And I had just been volunteering for like a month, and I finally got to move one camera. And so when we got the first mountain lion picture, the head biologist was like, they said to me and Gabe, the other tracker, they said, Jason and Gabe, you guys can move all the cameras. Awesome. And then we were getting mountain lions in all these places that you wouldn't expect them to be, because they were like urban remnant habitats. And they were just fascinated, which led to all kinds of other research projects. So there's so many like stories like that of trackers coming in and helping out on wildlife projects.
I absolutely loved hearing Jason's wisdom on how learning about the wilderness can help us feel more connected to nature, and how the benefits from time spent outdoors can keep us grounded in our daily lives long after we've left the woods. You can find links to Alderleaf Wilderness College and Jason's book, The Essential Skills of Wilderness Survival, in the show notes. Thank you so much for taking the time to travel with me today. May any words or wisdom that resonated stay with you and grow in the upcoming days. Till next time, stay wild and rooted in compassion.